B.
Welcome to the 2021 federal election debate presented by the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant in partnership with Rogers TV and Brant.One. My name is Paul Basanti. I'm the first Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant and your moderator this evening. The Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant is the voice of business that promotes economic prosperity and an improved quality of life for all in our region. The Chamber would like to acknowledge that a diverse, equitable, and safe community for all is essential to economic prosperity and an improved quality of life for our region. We acknowledge that the land we live and work on is located on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and we offer our respect for the long-standing relationship with our local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and Six Nations of the Grand River. More than any other election, this election comes at a critical time. The world is under a fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Canada and Brantford-Brant are facing a number of challenges to a safe economic recovery. To ensure our region's long-term success and prosperity, strategic measures and new ideas are required to help those areas of the economy and society most in need, and to establish a new vision for the improved quality of life in our community. I congratulate all the candidates on their commitment to our community and for their leadership in seeking the opportunity to represent the riding of Brantford-Brant in Ottawa. The candidates joining us today in alphabetical order are Adrienne Roberts of the New Democratic Party of Canada, Alison MacDonald of the Liberal Party of Canada, and Larry Brock of the Conservative Party of Canada. Joining me as panelists today is Joe Persia of Brant.One. We would like to acknowledge Carly Shortash of the Green Party of Canada, who met the guidelines for participation but is unable to participate in person today. Please watch the entire debate to view statements from Carly and other candidates as they will each have an opportunity to present their speaking points. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their opening remarks. The order of speaking was determined by a random draw. We will alternate posing questions. Each candidate will have the opportunity to respond to each question, and again, a 2-minute time limit will be imposed. In the instance of one candidate making specific reference to another candidate, that candidate will be allowed a 1-minute rebuttal. Each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for a closing statement, and the speaking order will be reversed to the opening remarks. The timekeeper will indicate when the candidates have 15 seconds remaining and will advise them when their time to speak has been completed. In the case of a challenge, the decision of the moderator will be final. I would ask the candidates to adhere to the agreed upon format and exercise professional decorum throughout the debate. Thank you, and we will begin with the candidates' opening remarks. The first candidate to speak will be Adrienne Roberts.
Hello, my name is Adrienne Roberts, and I am your NDP candidate, and thank you for tuning into this debate. In 1966, 2 youth boldly left all that they knew in England to come to Canada. Naive yet hopeful, guided only by their desire for change, they eventually found themselves on the steps of the train station with only a trunk, a handful of cash, and a used one-way ticket. These youth are my parents, and like them, with that same spirit of hope and determination, I am ready to fight for change. Because in every part of our country, families are worried about jobs, the health of our loved ones, the climate crisis, and the public services that we count on. The pandemic has shown us that many of the supports that we rely on just weren't there when we needed them. What we need now is the courage to act together. And that is exactly what New Democrats offer to Canadians. We will make life more affordable for everyday people by investing in healthcare, affordable housing, and pharmacare. We can end the opioid crisis that has caused so much grief and loss. We must combat the climate crisis because the future generations are depending on it. And we will undertake the important work of reconciliation in good faith, in true and equal partnership with Indigenous communities across the country. My name is Adrienne Roberts, and I would be both humbled and honored to represent you as your MP. And today, I am asking you to be bold. I am asking you to support me as your voice for our community as we focus on creating change. So join me and let's be bold together. Thank you.
Larry Brock.
I'd like to start by thanking the Chamber, Rogers, and Brant.One for organizing this debate. Brantford is my hometown. I live here with my wife, Angela, and our twin 12-year-old daughters. My wife is an acute care nurse and has been on the front line helping people suffering from this pandemic. Our daughters are like a lot of other kids, very active and love swimming competitively with the Brantford Aquatic Club. I've been a lawyer for almost 30 years and a Crown attorney for almost 18 years. It's been my job as an assistant Crown attorney to keep this community safe by holding offenders accountable for their actions. At the same time, I have stood up and supported victims of crime, advocating for them and other vulnerable members of this community. In my private life, I volunteered with organizations that support some of the less privileged people in our community. I was chair of the board of Crossing All Bridges. As president of the St. Leonard's Community Services, I supported people who needed help finding a job, kicking an addiction, or getting access to mental health services. And as chair of the United Way campaign in 2015, I helped raise more than $1.6 million for local charities. As an assistant Crown attorney, it's been my job to follow and apply the law. Now I want to be your voice and change the laws to address the myriad of problems we all face here in Brantford-Brant. I know from my experience in the courts that drug use and mental health are significant problems that need to be addressed. I've seen the fallout the pandemic has had on our businesses and workers. And as a dad, I've seen the impact on my children. I've been knocking on doors for months. I've listened to thousands of voters. They're telling me they want to get past COVID, get people working, and rebuild businesses. They're telling me they want housing to be attainable. They're telling me they want relief from skyrocketing cost of living. The Conservative Recovery Plan will do all of these things and more. I look forward to telling you more during this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alison McDonald.
Hello, I'm Alison McDonald, and I'm your federal Liberal candidate. I'm an Eagle Place resident, Six Nations band member, and a committed Liberal. I live in Brant, I work in Brant, and my family roots are in this riding. My parents were married in the Mohawk Chapel, and my mother lost her Native status as a result of this marriage and did not get it back until Bill C-31 was passed in the 1980s. This was my first experience in how the actions of government can have a dramatic effect on the lives of ordinary Canadians, and where I take inspiration for reconciling these past injustices as a priority and moving forward as your hopeful MP. This has stayed with me all my life and has helped to shape my career as a lawyer and advocate for people. To me, being an MP uses all the skills I've been mastering day in and out in the courtroom. I care about this community, and I want to bring these skills to acting as your Liberal MP for Brantford-Brant. But we need to make decisions that will ensure we leave a world that is fit to live in for our children. As a small business owner, I know the hardships that many people and businesses have faced throughout the pandemic. Our Liberal government's response is the perfect example of how governments can work to provide people with what they need to get through the hard times, but also prepare for the good times to come. Government's role is to help Canadians, and I intend to use my skills to help you, the people of Brantford-Brant, if I am your elected MP. Thank you. I echo my friend, Mr. Brock. Thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for organizing this debate today. I look forward to a lively discussion. I welcome the challenge that each of these candidates pose, and I invite those watching to listen with intention, with purpose, and with the knowledge that every vote cast is a vote that really matters. And best of luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll get started with questions. Joe.
Thank you, Paul. Our world has been forever altered over the past 19 months by the COVID-19 pandemic, and each party's platform must include a safe and comprehensive and strategic response that is going to drive our future economic recovery. What is the signature proposal of your party's platform regarding this economic recovery that you are most proud to support?
And we'll start with Ms. Roberts.
Thank you very much. For us, in terms of the economic recovery, as New Democrats, the most significant platform policy that we have is to do with our wealth tax. We have seen throughout this pandemic that the corporations who have profited the most from the pandemic need to pay their fair share. And I am very proud as a New Democrat that we are here for regular people and ensuring that those corporations pay their fair share with a wealth tax. This wealth tax will support pharmacare, climate crisis, and the things that we need for our pandemic recovery. The wealth tax will be for those who are with a net worth of 10 million or more. So that is the thing out of our platform that is going to help our economy the most. And as a New Democrat, I am so proud of.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald.
Well, I am most proud of, obviously, the $10 a day childcare platform. And raising kids is expensive. Working parents have had drastic effects during the pandemic, forcing to change jobs, leave jobs, or remain home to care for their children. We need our parents working. We need our families employed. We need our children cared for at a reasonable price. And we need skilled workers to remain in the workforce from all walks of life. And the Liberals, they've committed, and signed most provinces and territories to date with these agreements to provide affordable, accessible, and high-quality childcare. If re-elected, this plan will present 125,000 new childcare jobs and spots over the next 5 years across Canada. I'm also very intrigued by the new housing development, the Rent.Own program, the making a home for all Canadians, the affordability of homes, creating a Bill of Rights with respect to buyers' rights, and ensuring that there is a home for every person who wants one. The new programming for first-time home buyers is a new initiative allowing up to $40,000 to be saved on a tax-free in and out basis with respect to going towards a first home purchase. To me, that's very aggressive, and affordable housing and childcare combined, to me, are the most important platform of the Liberal Party today.
Thank you. Mr. Brock.
Thank you for that very important question. I am an extremely proud candidate to represent this riding for the Conservative Party under the leadership of Erin O'Toole. Our platform is very comprehensive. It was released on day one of this election. We are here to secure Canada's future, to move past the pandemic, and to look for a brighter future. There are 5 pillars to our plan. We are going to secure jobs by recovering the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic within 1 year. We're going to secure accountability by creating a new anti-corruption law to clean up the mess in Ottawa. We are going to secure mental health through our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. And we're also going to secure the country by creating a strategic stockpile of essential products and building the capacity to manufacture vaccines at home. And more importantly, we're going to secure our economy by balancing the budget over the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Business in many sectors like tourism and hospitality are still hurt by the pandemic related to public health measures. Programs like the wage subsidy and rent subsidy were essential to keeping our small businesses operational. How do you propose to continue support for the hardest hit sectors, and for how long? What more needs to be done? And we'll start with you, Ms. McDonald.
Well, I really like that question because we do need to help businesses like the Sanderson Centre and the Bell Homestead that are locally based. The Liberals intend to extend the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy to May 31st of 2022 if re-elected. And this will specifically assist tourism losses up to 75% of the revenue loss, which will help cover their fixed costs like wages and rent. There's also the industry of movies in Brantford. And Brantford has recently seen big Hollywood shows filming in more and more locations with bigger names, such as The Boys, one of my personal favorites, in multiple locations throughout our riding. The Liberals created the Compensation Fund for Canadian audiovisual productions to offset the loss of the insurance during the COVID-19 for these types of productions. If re-elected, Liberals will continue these programs. And honestly, who doesn't want to have more movies and large-scale productions come to our riding? These are amazing job opportunities with rentals from the various locations, food. One vendor I spoke with told me that the movies that continued during the pandemic actually kept him afloat. Movies are good for Brantford, and they're good for local businesses, and the Liberals want that to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brock.
Thank you. We've all seen the devastating impact that this pandemic has had on us personally and to our economy. This pandemic has been tough on all of us. People have lost jobs, had their hours cut. Many businesses are barely hanging on. Many others are completely out of business. The Conservative Recovery Plan will address the economic impacts of this pandemic and put Canada on a new path to prosperity. We will responsibly shift the focus of the emergency support programs and replace them with targeted programs to create jobs and help businesses return to a healthy state. We will do this in the following ways. The Canada Job Surge Plan will pay up to 50% of the salary of net new hires for 6 months following the end of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We have the Main Street Business Loan Program will provide up to $200,000 to help small and medium businesses in hospitality, retail, and tourism to get back on their feet with up to 25% forgiven. We also have a Rebuild Main Street tax credit, a 25% tax credit on amounts of up to $100,000 to Canadians who personally invest in a small business over the next 2 years. We also have the Conservative Childcare Tax Credit, which will help women stay in or return to the workforce. This is a refundable tax credit covering up to 75% of the cost of childcare, whether it's at a licensed daycare or in private. And we will also invest in infrastructure to immediately invest in critical projects that will put Canadians to work, cut down the commute time, and clean up the environment. The reality is very clear. Canada's Conservatives will do whatever it takes to secure our future and get Canada back on track. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
So, a lot of people aren't aware. They recognize me as a teacher, but for many years my parents owned a small business as a travel agency. And when we talk about the tourism industry, I recall the impact of September 11th. I understand personally the impact that the pandemic has particularly had on our tourism and hospitality industry. I've lived through a similar situation. And this is the thing, our small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and they need continued support. They should have access to the support you need to get through the crisis, to grow, to be innovative and stay competitive. So what we're going to do as a new Democrat government, we're going to be there to support you. And that means that we are going to ensure that small businesses' wage and rent subsidies, which we pushed for during the pandemic, will still be there for you to be able to remain fully open or reopen in case of a fourth wave. In addition, pharmacare. This connects for our small business owners, many of whom are supporting their employees with benefits. By integrating pharmacare into our medical system, this will alleviate many of the burdens that small employers have when it comes to paying for benefits for their employees. These are the backbone of our small business, and we understand as New Democrats how important and vital our small businesses are in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Chamber members, the business community, and many of our households operate in a world of balanced budgets. But we can also appreciate that government is different and understand the need for investment in infrastructure and skills through a competitive tax program. what is your party's plan to return to pre-pandemic deficit or GDP levels, or a more balanced budget, I should say?
To me?
Yep.
Thank you. The budget was balanced in 2015 under the Harper government. In 2019, before the pandemic, the deficit had ballooned to almost $20 billion. Spending to protect Canadians in the pandemic was the right thing to do, and Canada's Conservatives supported it. But Liberal spending plans go far beyond what is needed to address the economic crisis of the pandemic. Under Justin Trudeau, Canada incurred the largest per capita deficit and hit the highest unemployment rate in the G7. That means Canada spent the most to achieve the least. Liberal spending is so bad, the Parliamentary Budget Officer says the federal budget may not be balanced until 2070. If inflation continues to rise, that will make the problem even worse. Higher interest rates means that the government will spend more money paying off debt and have less to pay for necessary programs or to cut taxes. Right now, Canada is borrowing $424 million each day. There are consequences, and we are all paying for it. Inflation is no accident. We have a solution. It is the Conservative solution. Readjust the emergency COVID support systems in a responsible way as Canadians are vaccinated and the economy reopens. Ensure that stimulus measures are targeted to avoid creating a structural deficit. Get the economy growing again after years of slow growth under the Liberals so that we have the revenue to pay for the government services that Canadians rely upon. And lastly, again, one of the 5 pillars, let's get the budget back into balance. It does not balance itself, and we promise to do that in the next 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. During the pandemic, Canadian billionaire wealth went up by $78 billion. And Canada's wealthiest 87 families collectively own the same amount of the lowest earning 12 million Canadians. As a New Democrat, we know that this pandemic shouldn't be on, the recovery shouldn't be on the backs of regular people. And that is why we are committed to a wealth tax. That wealth tax will bring in billions of dollars to ensure that we can pay for the services that we actually need, which we saw during the pandemic were vital to our well-being. In addition to ensuring that the ultra-rich and the corporations pay their fair share, we're going to roll back those corporate tax cuts back to their 2010 levels while maintaining the small business tax rates at their current levels. We're going to get rid of those tax loopholes for the richest and the big corporations. We're going to get tough on tax evasion and tax avoidance. And we're going to actually invest in the CRA to ensure that they can do the job they need to do to close up all those loopholes. That is how we're going to bring money into our budget and afford the services that we need for our mental health, our pharmacare, and housing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. MacDonald, I'll turn it over to you, and you'll have an extra minute to respond to the references to your party's leader.
All right. So one of the markers of the pandemic is actually that our banks and insurance companies were very profitable. In fact, they increased, the largest 6 banks in Canada increased their operating income by over 17%. And I would suggest that reflects the stability of the Canadian markets and our banks during the pandemic, given the programming and the money invested by the Liberals back into Canadians and keeping so many afloat. Liberals intend, if re-elected, to increase the corporate income tax from 15% to 18% on all earnings over $1 billion for banks and insurance companies. With respect to during the pandemic and the spending, it's clearly Liberals were there for Canadians. The Liberals were there to provide all of the major subsidies and programming to keep Canadians in their homes, to keep them safe, and to carry out the action plan with respect to addressing the ongoing pandemic, of which is not quite over. We have the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. As of October 4th of 2020, 8.9 million Canadians were supported, and that was a total of 81.6 billion in direct payments to Canadians. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, again, another economic lifeline. This program protected 1.88 million jobs, and 27.6 billion in subsidies were paid out over 1 million applications. There's also the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy and lockdown support, again, another economic lifeline. 2.76 billion in subsidies paid out to over 155,000 organizations. And the Canadian Recovery Benefit, it protected over 5 million jobs, with 14.5 billion provided to 1.86 million Canadians as of April 11, 2021. So overall, in terms of the Liberals, over 150,000 businesses were assisted with support for rent, mortgage, other expenses. And the Liberals stood up for Canadian businesses and workers and will continue to stand by those Canada's businesses. They provided additional support to businesses that were forced to close due to public health guidelines, such as hair salons, personal services, and really anything deemed non-essential initially during the first 3 months of the pandemic in 2020. Pardon me. With respect to, finally, there was also the Canadian Emergency Business Account, and that is where it was businesses. Over 340,000 loans were provided to businesses worth a total of 18.48 billion. So the Liberal platform is to keep small businesses going, gave them the lifeline they needed to pay expenses and maintain the cash flow while in need. That's the Liberal intention, and continuing to support ongoing businesses staying afloat is what the Liberals will continue if re-elected. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, vaccinations have become a key tool in the fight against COVID-19, and the ability of countries to open their borders to trade and travel for businesses to reopen to in-person commerce. Proof of vaccination and rapid screening programs are quickly being developed, both by government and businesses, to allow for safe employment and return to work or school activities. Do you support a national proof of vaccine program? And how does your party plan to support businesses as they navigate a safe reopening of the Canadian economy? And we'll start with you, Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. As we saw through the pandemic, ensuring that we have supply of vaccines at the very beginning was a difficult issue because we did not have the ability to produce the vaccines ourselves. A new Democrat government will ensure that we have a Crown Corporation-based vaccine industry here in our country to ensure that any future pandemic waves will be available so that we have it made here in Canada, similar to what we had many years ago. And that's one way that we're going to ensure that everyone has quick access to the vaccine. We do have, for federal employees, we do ask that for the mandated vaccines, but we also recognize that due to certain medical conditions, there'll be other programs in place to support those who may not be able to take the vaccine. We always know there's exceptions to the rule. In addition, we need to focus on the supplies around the pandemic that we needed. Here in Brantford-Brant, we have a new circular economy-based company that is manufacturing PPE using recycled PPE products that go through a sterilization process. These are the sort of just transition focuses and innovation in our economy locally that we want to focus on as we move forward into this new global world of pandemics and fear of becoming ill and making sure that we're prepared in the future. So that is some of the different ways that a new Democrat government is going to focus on ensuring that should the wave continue, that we have what we need here made in Canada to ensure that everyone is safe and able to reopen businesses safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Allison.
Thank you. Well, With respect to proof of vaccination, we've stepped up, we wore masks, we stayed home, we can hug, and we couldn't travel without extreme hurdles. And the Liberals and all of us want to return to normal life. We want to protect our hard-won gains, and we want to get Canadians moving again in a safe and responsible way, and we want to continue to increase the numbers of people who are vaccinated. The Liberals will introduce a $1 billion proof of vaccination fund. They will continue to procure enough vaccines for all Canadians to receive a booster and a second-generation shot. With respect to the vaccine delivery, there were over 25 million doses have been administered, and Ontario alone received $16.2 billion through the Canada Health Transfer, which was an increase of $616 million from 2019. With respect to the Safe Restart Agreement in Ontario alone, Ontario received $5.1 billion in total, and these transfers were to help the healthcare system with capacity, support, protecting people with mental health, substance use, homelessness. In fact, $776.6 million was to support Ontario municipalities with their COVID-19 operating costs within Ontario. There was a further $1.2 billion to ensure all workers have access to the proper protective equipment, and $234.6 million was also provided to address the reduced availability of childcare during the pandemic. These are all facts that the Liberals have done in Ontario alone. Pardon me. I would say that Liberals have followed the science in terms of addressing the pandemic, and Liberals will continue to be the party to follow the science with the definitive belief that the pandemic can be addressed, that we can all be safe, that we can return to normal, healthy lives, and that our children, first and foremost, beyond anyone, again with the child care program of the $10 a day, helps more parents return to the workforce and reduce that overall cost so that they can grow the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry.
Thank you. We as Canada's Conservatives are pleased where we stand as a nation in terms of the access to the vaccines and the percentages by which Canadians have chosen to get vaccinated, whether that be a single dose or a double dose. But let's not overlook the reality of where things stood very early on in the pandemic. The Canadian government that exists under Justin Trudeau was very slow in terms of acquiring the necessary vaccines to save lives. It is absolutely heartbreaking when I take a look at the statistics of the number of people who have suffered across this great nation and the number of deaths that probably could have been saved had we had access to the vaccines very, very early. The fact that Justin Trudeau went to China to acquire vaccines that ultimately did not follow through on is very disturbing, and it's disheartening. It's disheartening to Canadians. So I say that with conviction because one of the pillars of the Canada Conservative plan to secure our future, as I indicated earlier, is to secure the country against any further pandemics by creating a strategic stockpile of essential products and building the capacity to manufacture Canadian-made products and PPE equipment. We are very firm on that. That is how we are ready for the next pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald, you may have 1 minute to rebut.
Thank you very much. With respect to the start of the pandemic, let's remember that Sophie Gregoire Trudeau actually had COVID-19 right when this was announced. And Justin Trudeau continued to come out every day, meeting Canadians, leaving his family, leaving his wife, and taking care of our country, really putting the country and the citizens first before his own family. With respect to the dosages, the Liberals have had enough doses for every eligible Canadian to be fully vaccinated by July of 2021, and that was 2 months ahead of schedule. The Liberals have moved very fast to procure vaccines to protect Canadians, and they will continue, as I said earlier, to follow the science required to do so and to continue to keep Liberals and all Canadians safe. Thank you.
Joe.
Thank you, Paul. Shifting gears here just a little bit. The opioid epidemic is devastating communities across the country, including Brantford-Brant, where over 20 people have died this year alone. And the number of overdoses continues to rise. The successful candidate and future member of Parliament for this riding, like the Chamber, will have a seat at the Downtown Improvement Task Force. What actions can the federal government take to address this issue right here in our community?
And we'll start with you, Allison.
One moment. Well, obviously, the Liberals care about homelessness, mental health as a priority. This has already been indicated in terms of rolling out transfer payments to address those issues. In terms of the local issues, I've had many clients who have been affected by opioids, who have lost children, who, pardon me, have been victims themselves. Child clients of mine who have lost mothers to overdoses during the pandemic especially. And as I understand, there have been transfer payments and an intention to increase payments with respect to shelters like Nova Vita, addressing the ongoing methadone programs, and meriting that out to our communities. So the Liberals clearly have a vested interest at the federal level in working with municipalities and working with the provinces, even though healthcare is a provincial mandate. But again, that has to deal with the health transfer benefit, which I believe was, again, 26.6 million in Ontario, those programs would filter through with that. So obviously that's a hot topic. That's something I'm very passionate about. Vulnerable people are incredibly important, and they deserve as many rights as everyone else. Whether they're addicted or not, whether they have children or not, whatever their circumstances, and the Liberals will be there for them, indeed.
Thank you. Larry.
Thank you. I share my colleague Allison's passion on this topic. As we're both lawyers working in the Brantford court system, we have seen the tragic consequences that literally I could count on a weekly basis. The number of overdoses, the number of deaths. This is not a homegrown issue. This is a pandemic that is spreading across this country. It's impacting this riding. It's impacting our Indigenous neighbors, and we have to take action as a federal government. We've seen an increase also in violent crime associated with opiate use. Often, drug addiction can be tied to other issues, such as mental health problems and homelessness. In order to fix this, you have to fix them all. On the issue of opiates, we will treat the epidemic as a health issue because that's exactly what it is. We believe that law enforcement should focus on dealers and traffickers. The last thing that those suffering from addiction should have to worry about is being arrested. We plan on investing $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery centers. We're going to support innovative approaches to address the crises of the mental health challenges and addiction, such as land-based treatment programs developed and managed by Indigenous communities as part of a plan to enhance the delivery of culturally appropriate addictions treatment and prevention services in First Nation communities with high needs, also reflecting the cultural needs and their language requirements. We're also going to partner with provinces to ensure that naloxone kits are available for free across Canada. We have a mental health action plan that Erin O'Toole announced in Brantford last week, again, one of our 5 pillars, and we also have some steps to deal with the homelessness issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian.
In 2019, Brantford-Brant per capita had the highest number of cases of overdoses at the emergency room visits. This is not just a national crisis, this is a local crisis. It is a public health emergency. I personally have been working with BSUN, the Brantford Substance Users Network, People Helping People, and various businesses downtown. I do go down late at night. I do meet with our street families. I am very aware, and this is a passionate area of interest for me because I am invested in the people of our community who have often been neglected and forgotten. A new Democrat government has a bold plan to deal with the opioid crisis. This includes decriminalization, because the reality is those who are using substances, it comes out of trauma and mental illness. The last thing anyone needs is to also have, while dealing with all those barriers, is to have a record for a small possession. We instead will tackle those who are responsible for the distribution. We will also focus on ensuring the wraparound supports are available. Because as we all know, when someone is ready for help, they need it now. A waiting list is not sufficient. And right now, we don't have the services available to help those who require assistance and are looking for harm reduction, who are looking for counseling, who are looking for transitional housing. And you cannot remove housing, mental health, and racial injustices and inequalities from the opioid crisis. Everything is connected, and we must tackle all of these things. Right here in Brantford-Brant, I am committed, and I am pledging right now to you today, this is one of the most important things we can do for our community, and I am fighting every day to tackle this opioid crisis. I am on the streets, I am here, and I am ready to tackle this opioid crisis. We have lost far too many people to this epidemic of opioid. Thank you.
Thank you. Trade agreements with the United States and Mexico, as well as other significant trading partners, make a lot of headlines and are an essential aspect to the Canadian economy. However, interprovincial trade and commerce remain a key challenge in Canada. Why is it easier to buy a bottle of California wine in Ontario than a bottle of British Columbian wine? How does your party propose to address this imbalance? And we'll start with you, Mr. Brock.
Thank you. A good way to create jobs, to control the cost of living and promote exports is by making businesses far more competitive than they currently are. Red tape, trade barriers, and complicated tax systems add to the cost of doing business without adding any benefit for workers, consumers, or companies. We have a plan for this. We are going to review the tax system. We're going to appoint an expert panel to make recommendations to make it simpler and fairer while improving Canada's competitiveness to spur job creation. We're going to appoint a minister responsible for red tape reduction to eliminate unneeded or counterproductive red tape. We're going to break down interprovincial trade barriers. We need to ensure that Canada lives up to the economic union it was supposed to be by removing interprovincial trade barriers. This will spur economic growth when we need it the most. We're going to connect all Canadians to high-speed internet by 2025. We're going to build the transportation networks Canadian businesses need to get products to markets and workers need to get to their jobs. We're going to level a playing field for Canadian businesses in real competition by making foreign tech companies pay for their fair share of taxes and giving Canada's competition laws real teeth. And lastly, we're going to unleash innovation. Canadians are innovative, but too often the innovators hit barriers that prevent them from taking advantage of their intentions or growing their businesses in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
We all expect that our trade deals will be fair, respect human rights, protect the environment, and put the interest of Canadian workers and communities first. So for instance, one of the things as a New Democrat we are committed to is the protection of supply management. As we know, Canadian dairy is concerned with the influx of, with the past trade deals, with the influx of out-of-Canada dairy products moving into Canada. We must protect our supply management system through our trade deals. In addition, we can't be hypocrites when it comes to climate change. We have to, at international conferences in our trade deals, making sure that we're making trade deals that ensure that it is good for our environment and tackling the climate crisis. We're going to work for fair trade, not bad trade deals that serve corporate interests instead of workers. In addition, we've got to make sure that the trade deals that we make are in the best interest of human rights. We're going to stop selling arms to countries that violate human rights, like Saudi Arabia. And we're going to stop selling Canadian arms to Israel until the end of the illegal occupation. Trade deals is not just about money. It is making sure that we model choices that reflect the human rights that we believe in matter, that reflect our climate action policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald.
Well, I just read something about the Liberals in terms of the wine comment that I think is really exciting, that they wish to create in Ontario alone a wine commission, essentially to deal with that very issue. So that's already been contemplated by the Liberals in terms of wine and alcohol, which is really fascinating. I would agree with both of my friends that creating cleaner communities is necessary in terms of an overall national approach. Pardon me, the cost of commuting is high, obviously, in pollution. The Liberals have already made zero-emission vehicles more affordable and accessible by offering up to $5,000 rebate to 500,000 Canadians already. They will continue to do this. They hope to build 50,000 more charging stations, and this is nationally, with a goal of requiring at least 1/2 of all passenger vehicles sold in Canada to have zero emissions by 2030 and all zero emissions by 2035. The Liberals wish to make clean technology and meet that net zero emissions goal by 2050. They're committed to planting 2 billion trees to cut pollution and create jobs. And this climate and water and ocean, I'll say congeniality approach in terms of the threats that our climate is creating for our jobs and our interprovincial dealings is the comprehensive plan to address that on a national level. They'll continue to implement a stronger freshwater action plan, for example. There's a historic investment of $1 billion over 10 years to restore and protect large lake and river systems. They would like to establish a Canada Water Agency, because I think really the environment has to be the key basis to addressing all of these other interprovincial trades. If we don't have the mechanics to address those emissions and meet those demands in terms of an environmentally safe manner, then we won't get very far in terms of interprovincial trade and commerce. Those would be my comments on behalf of the Liberals. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Paul. Let's turn our attention to another big news story over the past 2 years. The housing industry, and more specifically the pace at which housing prices have risen when compared to income levels. The average house price in Brantford rose 30% over a year in July. Housing impacts all Canadians, from seniors aging in place to young couples looking for neighborhood schools. What does your party propose to do to address the issue of housing affordability in Brantford-Brant?
And we'll start with you, Ms. Roberts.
So on the doorsteps, and everywhere we go, everyone is talking about housing here in Brantford-Brant. And I can also tell you that most people I meet who are 35 and younger have given up the dream of ever owning their own home. I spoke just yesterday with a constituent who has to sell his home and move out east to somewhere cheaper. He doesn't want to move, but he has no choice because of the lack of affordability for him in this city. As a New Democrat, I am very proud to say that we are committed to actually tackling the housing crisis. In addition to 500,000 units that will be built over the next 10 years, with more than half built in the first 5 years, we are also committed to working with the municipalities and the provinces to really be creative and develop innovative social housing and different cooperative housing. I myself have personally reached out to a number of our housing corporations here, such as Brantford Native Housing. We spoke even about a longhouse model. So being very innovative in how we look at housing. But it's not just about building housing. It's also about ensuring that we are taxing and reducing the number of foreign buyers here with a 20% tax on foreign buyers. In addition, always focused on trying to ensure that those who are most vulnerable and homeless right now have a place to live. We believe in a housing first strategy, which means that until you have a home, it is not easy for people to get a job, and lead other productive life opportunities. So a housing first strategy is something we are committed to, we believe in. We also, as a New Democrat government, are committed to, within the first 100 days of our mandate as a government, to a bold Indigenous housing platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald.
Thank you. Well, we've already talked about this, but every Canadian deserves a safe and affordable place to call home. And the Liberals have already launched the first ever national housing strategy with $35 billion investment and helped already more than 1 million Canadians find homes. The other initiatives include a $1 billion fund of loans and grants to develop rent-to-own projects, create a pathway to home ownership for renters, and again, mentioning the tax-free first home savings account that allows Canadians under 40 to save up to $40,000 tax-free toward their first home. More importantly, Liberals are also proposing a home buyer's bill of rights that will ban blind bidding, establish a legal right to a home inspection, ensure banks as lenders are offering mortgage deferrals for up to 6 months in the event of job loss or life happening and other major life events. The Liberals intend to ban new foreign ownership for at least 2 years and crack down on house flipping. With respect to in terms of homelessness, currently in Brantford-Brant, I share both of my friends. We have tent cities, we have couch surfing, we have people living in their cars, and affordable housing is key to part of our recovery from the pandemic. Again, Liberals have invested $1 billion in the Rapid Housing Initiative in October of 2020 to secure more accessible and affordable housing for our homeless. And the Liberals continue to want to deliver relevant programs and did also help to create up to 3,000 new affordable homes nationwide, including, as I already indicated, a $50 million investment in such locations as Nova Vida, locally we know it as a shelter, and also transferred over $150 million to cities and organizations during the pandemic itself to address homelessness and prevent outbreaks in shelters. The Liberal government is extremely dedicated to addressing the housing crisis and intends on having every Canadian who wants a home to have a home. Thanks.
Thank you. Larry.
I've grown up here and I love our home in Brantford-Brant, and I want everyone who works, lives, and plays to enjoy this community by living in this amazing community. But the reality is we live in a high-growth area with many new people flocking to this jurisdiction. We've seen house prices rise by 37% in the past year. Rental rates have risen dramatically too, and we have bidding wars on rental units. The increases are tied in part to supply issues and in part to speculators driving up prices. I've been hearing at the doors the frustration that people are simply unable to afford to buy a home. So we as Canada's Conservatives have a plan. We are committed to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years. This is a crisis. That is the reality. 500,000 homes over 10 years does not address the crisis that it is. How are we going to do that? As follows. We're going to provide tax incentives to increase the supply of rental housing, including GST reductions and deferrals of capital gain tax for investments in rental housing, making it easier for families to get a mortgage by encouraging a new market in the 7 to 10-year mortgage range. Remove the requirement to conduct a stress test when homeowners renew a mortgage with a different lender. This will increase competitiveness. Encourage foreign investment in purpose-built rental housing that is affordable to Canadians. Encourage the use of gray fields and brown fields. Make that accessible to the communities to build the housing that we need now, not 10 years from now. And most importantly, we're going to release up to 15% of the federal net real estate portfolio. We as a federal government are the biggest landowners in this country, and make that land available for housing development. We have a plan for Indigenous housing, which I hope I can address further on, and we're going to reduce speculation in the housing market. Thank you.
Thank you. The Canadian tax system was last overhauled in 1966. Is it time for a Royal Commission on Taxation to create a more efficient system of taxation for small businesses, to encourage job creation and innovation, and to simplify the system for all Canadians? How does your party propose to address the complexity of the Canadian tax system? And we'll start with you, Ms. McDonald.
Well, that's a very loaded question, I think, in fairness. I'm asking a family lawyer about taxation, but I'll give it my best shot, obviously. I think in terms of a Royal Commission, that would be a first step. I think they've already introduced, in terms of small businesses alone, they have introduced a refundable tax credit, and it's on a very small example, obviously, but that's to assist small businesses who need to improve their air ventilation systems after the pandemic, and introducing tax incentives with respect to that. The Liberals have introduced the tax incentives with respect to purchasing the net zero emission vehicles. So clearly, there's a concern amongst all Canadians about taxes, about how they're calculated. One in particular would be the child tax credit and how that is calculated. The other issue I would mention in terms of a Royal Commission being created is that the Canada Revenue Agency essentially has almost blanket powers to decide what they do internally. It's very difficult, for example, for families who need the child tax benefit and whatnot. The courts have no control over that, for example. That's an entirely mandated internal decision dictated throughout the Canada Revenue Agency. So certainly a Royal Commission being created would be an excellent opportunity, an excellent start to consider all of these competing interests, and I personally would support that myself on behalf of my party and my position. But in terms of just coming out of a pandemic and then now also looking at taxation, we might not quite be there yet. In terms of a nation, that's a very hot topic, obviously, and we see tempers are already very high in terms of vaccinations, addressing the pandemic. Introducing a Royal Commission, while I think very beneficial, we would need to do some more study on that, indeed.
That's overtime. Thank you. Mr. Brock, we'll turn it over to you.
The Conservatives have a long history of tax competitiveness and tax reduction. That has been seen over several decades in terms of providing tax relief directly to homeowners, to consumers, to businesses. That will continue under an Aaron O'Toole-led Conservative government. As I've indicated earlier, in response to one of the questions on business competitiveness, we are going to review the tax system. We're going to appoint an expert panel to make recommendations to make it simpler and fairer while improving Canada's competitiveness to spur job creation. I'm not going to opine on a Royal Commission. That's a recommendation that I can have a discussion with Aaron O'Toole and the other leaders. But I think it's obviously a time that we reflected on the tax system throughout this country for homeowners, individuals, and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. So I think, when we look at a Royal Commission on our taxation, I think for a lot of people who are tuning in right now, when we talk about tax, a lot of people are mostly focused on how is that impacting me? And as an NDP representative, we are about ensuring that everyday working people do not feel squeezed anymore, especially by taxes. We're looking at focusing, as I said earlier, on really going after the corporate taxation to ensure that the wealthiest and those who haven't paid their fair share are there to support rather than workers. For most people living their day-to-day, their focus on tax is about what they see on their paycheck. So that is what we don't want to impact. We want to make sure that workers are not being charged additional fees to pay for things. It's about going after corporations and making sure that we bring those levels back up to 2010 to an 18% so that they are responsible for paying their fair share to support our economy. So that is something in terms of a Royal Commission on taxation that we can discuss, but I think the priority right now for people is trying to get through life and affordability. That's where we need to focus our attention. Now, saying that, an NDP government will ensure that we're giving more supports to the CRA so that they can get through and do their jobs and make sure that they're closing those tax loopholes and going after the tax evaders to ensure that people are supported, because that's the priority we have right now, as we've seen in the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Paul, once again, I have the opportunity to shift gears just a little bit. The discovery of unmarked graves of children at residential schools across Canada shocked and disturbed many of us and the country as a whole earlier this year. With several other inquiries either in progress or concluded, and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission only starting to be realized, much more work is required. How does your party plan to address the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and what role do you see the local business community having in reconciliation?
Mr. Brock.
Thank you. Indigenous peoples make up a large proportion of this riding. Some live on the Six Nation and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Many more live in our urban areas. There are profound issues and long-standing issues that need to be addressed, from land claims to the tragedy of residential schools. It is our responsibility to deal with these issues on a nation-to-nation basis. Canadians' consciousness were shocked at the revelation of unmarked graves at the sites of former residential schools. These discoveries were a heartbreaking reminder of the pain Indigenous children, their families, and their communities were subjected to. Canada's first residential school was the Mohawk Institute in Brantford. As Canada's Conservatives, we will fund the investigation here and at all former residential schools' unmarked graves which may exist, including the sites where children have already been discovered. We will develop a comprehensive plan to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Report calls to action 71 through 76. We will ensure that proper resources are allocated for communities to re-enter, commemorate, and honor any individuals discovered through the investigation. We will develop a thorough set of resources to educate Canadians of all ages on the tragic history of residential schools in Canada. That in of itself addresses the truth component in the Truth and Reconciliation Report. I was touched as a dad when I went on the awakening walk to the Mohawk Institute a few months ago with my family, particularly my twin daughters. And I explained to them and educated them as to what so many children of their age had to endure, being ripped from their families, being ripped of their identities, being ripped of their names. It was absolutely heartbreaking. So to give the families an opportunity to educate, to give Canadians a whole to educate, to incorporate that into an educational system is priority number one for Canada's Conservatives. We have drinking water advisories that need to be addressed. It's just astounding that a G7 nation has so many Indigenous neighbors boiling water. It is inexcusable. And we have land claims that finally need to be addressed.
Okay, that's time.
So it wasn't a discovery because people here in Brantford-Brant knew. We knew the stories. This has been passed down through families, through generations. But an awakening has happened and an awareness among the wider community and a realization of children who were never returned home. That needs to be addressed through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A new Democrat government fully will fund any requests for any ground radar penetrating products to bring the children home. That is something we are fully committed to. In addition, in partnership with Indigenous peoples, a new Democrat government will implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. In terms of reconciliation, one thing I am deeply committed to is the work that is being done right now at Gowaneo. I have reached out and spoken with the board members. For here locally, they need a building. And this is how we move beyond the tragedy, beyond the sorrow of what was lost. In speaking with the board members, by building a building for a school that's been in operation for 34 years, with the immersion of language and culturally responsive programming, this is the hope that the board members expressed, is how we move forward. These are a way that we can commit locally. In addition, we also have here many, many people who don't live on territory living in Brantford-Brant. So focusing on ensuring that they have access to the healthcare and supports that they need by working with the Indigenous Health Centre. We've met and we've discussed the nutrition, transitional housing, family counseling that would be available with the development of this building in Eagle Place. So there are boil water advisories. With the water treatment plan is there, but we need to make sure that people can get the pipelines to have the water delivered. That is a priority for a new Democratic government under Jagmeet Singh. No more excuses, no more platitudes. It's time to act.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald.
Well, our Liberal government has been committed to advancing reconciliation since day one, and we are working with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations to accelerate our government's 10-year plan to continue to build social infrastructure and making additional investments to address all of these issues. But, personally, the Mohawk Institute, formerly known as the Mush Hole, and now the Woodland Cultural Center that stands there today, was open from 1828 to 1969. It closed the same year my parents got married at the Mohawk Chapel. And nothing has been unearthed as of yet. I would agree with my friend, Ms. Roberts, that this is a reality in terms of unmarked graves that Indigenous people have known forever. And it is this awareness and embracing and compassion from, I'll say, non-Indigenous, largely Canadians, who have only started to learn about these traumatic histories that are just coming to light for many people. The community is going to require healing and mourning. And what I can say in terms of the Liberals, they intend to appoint a special Indigenous interlocutor dedicated to working collaboratively with Indigenous peoples to make recommendations to strengthen federal laws and practices regarding the unmarked burial sites and to protect and preserve these sites. They're suggesting another $20 million to build a national monument in Ottawa honoring the survivors and the lost children. An additional $100 million over 2 years to help Indigenous communities manage their residential school buildings that remain, either through demolition, through rehabilitation, or constructing new facilities. There's another $107 million planned to provide essential mental health, cultural, and emotional services to recover from the intergenerational trauma and the recent discoveries of these unmarked graves. With respect to the water advisories, in terms of our local Six Nations and Mississaugas of the Credit, they do not have a boil water advisory, but most of the residents do not have access to the municipal water that's available. So we still require funding to address those issues, and the Liberals have invested over $4 billion in 535 water infrastructure projects, including 99 new water plants and 436 plant upgrades, lifted 109 long-term water advisories, and have prevented 183 short-term advisories.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's time, and it seems that all candidates here have a lot to say about this particular issue. One thing that we touched on, but not specifically, going off script a little, is the issue of Native housing. And I'd like to give the time over to you, 1 minute per candidate in the same order, to address what your party's considerations would be specifically for Native housing. So again, we'll follow the same order, starting with you, Mr. Brock.
As I alluded to in an earlier response, the housing crisis not only exists here in Brantford, but it exists on the Six Nations, it exists on Mississaugas. And we as Canada's Conservatives believe in a Indigenous-led initiative in partnership with the federal government to make funds available to them to put shovels to the ground. It is no secret that the commercial and residential development here in Brantford often lags behind in terms of red tape, approval processes, things of that nature, which take several years before a shovel hits the ground. We have to address that head on, but particularly as it relates to our Indigenous neighbours, and we as Canada's Conservatives are dedicated to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. So under my leader, Jagmeet Singh for the New Democratic Party of Canada, we are committing, and we've put it in our platform, that within the first 100 days of a government mandate, we're going to work with Indigenous peoples across this country to develop a national housing plan specifically targeted for Indigenous communities. As we have seen throughout the pandemic and heard from MPs like Mumala Kakak, the state of housing throughout Canada for our Indigenous communities, Métis and Inuit communities, is not tolerable. This is part of a housing first strategy. People have the right to be in a safe home with access to water, not in mold. Housing is a human right, and we have the wealth, we have the ability to make changes. So I am very proud of the work that my party has done with different constituents all over this country to focus on Indigenous-led programming for a national housing policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. McDonald.
Thank you. In terms of the housing, a re-elected Liberal government will help build, preserve, and repair 1.4 million homes over the next 4 years. And that is 30% more than the homes that Aaron O'Toole's Conservatives have promised. The plan includes specific support for Indigenous housing by co-developing with Indigenous partners as urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy, and creating a national Indigenous housing center, which will see Indigenous people overseeing themselves federal Indigenous housing programs. So empowering and giving those rights and those funds and the consultation with Indigenous people themselves to say, what do you want? What do you need? What's happening in your community? Because all of the communities have different needs and different people and different cultures, obviously. In any event, the Liberals clearly very, very dedicated to that, and I think it's also highlighted by the September 30th Day of Truth and Reconciliation as a national holiday as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brock, you may have a minute to rebut the reference to your party's leader.
As indicated earlier, Canada's Conservatives are wholly committed to our Indigenous neighbours and friends. We don't speak in platitudes, we speak in action. We have a for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing strategy. We are going to partner with all Indigenous communities across this great country and empower Indigenous peoples with their own autonomy to meet their own housing needs. We will give true meaning to the concept of a nation-to-nation recognition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Brantford-Brant is an age-friendly community, and thanks to the advocacy work of the Grand River Council on Aging, politicians at all levels, and the business community in supporting many of the 628 suggestions from the 2017 Community Impact Report. What more needs to be done in our region to support people of all ages, in particular the growing population of seniors? And we'll start with you, Ms. Roberts.
Thank you. Going door to door, I've met a number of people of all ages, and interestingly, through the pandemic, what's coming across, especially with some of our more aging members of our Brantford-Brant, is the sense of isolation that many are feeling and the affordability that many are struggling with right now. So one of the things to tackle that is that as a New Democrat, we are focused on ensuring lifting people out of poverty and making sure that people can access what they need and afford what they need. And that is with a guaranteed livable income. And we're going to start with seniors to make sure that they have enough money to pay their rent, their food, and the requirements that they need, as well as people with disabilities. These are sometimes our most financially marginalized people in society. A guaranteed livable income will remove the systemic poverty that has plagued for so many of our people who are trying to get through day by day. So as a New Democrat, we are focused on ensuring that people have what they need to afford life. And we're going to start with our seniors to ensure they have a guaranteed livable income, and people with disabilities a guaranteed livable income. I can tell you, as an educator who works predominantly in special education, I often see students who leave, and I worry about what will happen after age 21 when they leave school. They may not have a high school diploma. Will they have the funds available for themselves to ensure that they can afford life, can afford food, can afford rent? So we need to start tackling the systemic poverty that has been created in our society for those who need that assistance. So a guaranteed livable income. And we're going to start with seniors and people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald.
Thank you very much. When I've been going door to door as well, one of the predominant themes that I'm seeing and people I'm meeting are many seniors who are continuing to reside in their lifelong homes. They are not downsizing. We have an aging, capable population who continue to work, even part-time, pardon me, but we also have many seniors who are relying on old age security, on CPP, and are of somewhat of limited means, but still continue to live in their same homes that they've paid for a long time ago. Many seniors are worried about their finances, obviously, during their retirement. The Liberals so far have provided up to an extra $875 to seniors almost immediately when the pandemic started. They plan on permanently increasing the guaranteed income supplement to $500 and an additional $500 annually for single seniors and $750 for couples starting at age 65. And obviously, these are our most vulnerable seniors, and the Liberals plan on continuing to take care of them. In terms of the seniors during the pandemic, the Liberals reacted immediately, provided the PPE in the long-term care homes, deployed the Canadian Armed Forces, funded the Canadian Red Cross, and provided the emergency wages to personal support workers in long-term care. The Liberals, again, plan to continue this work collaboratively with the provinces and territories by increasing personal support wages, improve the quality of the long-term care beds and homes, develop a safe long-term care act to ensure seniors are guaranteed care they deserve no matter where they live. And in terms of our youth, I think we have to look at the safe in-person return to schools, the support that is there, the funding that is being provided in terms of the Safe Return to Class Fund, which was $763.3 million to Ontario alone, which was rolled out October of 2020 and January of 2021. And those monies are specifically used to improve ventilation, adapt learning spaces, increase PPE, hand sanitation, hygiene, cleaning supplies, and providing health and safety training for staff. This is bridging the intergenerational connection between our seniors, our middle-aged people, youth, and the children. And I think the Liberals have covered that with respect to all ages at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Brock.
Thank you. Knocking on doors for the last several months, I have knocked on and spoken to so many seniors. And it's been absolutely heartbreaking to see their anguish, their fear, their concern that this pandemic has created to their lifestyle, their insecurity, wondering how they're going to pay for groceries, wondering how they're going to pay for rent, how they're going to pay for mortgage. It was just absolutely heartbreaking. We, as Canada's Conservatives, we have a plan. COVID-19 has been devastating for Canada's seniors and has shown for all to see the failures of our long-term care systems. With an aging population and Canadians living longer, we have had shortages of long-term care beds for years. COVID has shown us how deadly those shortages and the overcrowding they bring can be. Canada's Conservatives have a plan to help seniors stay in their own homes, improve their quality, and maintain financial security for seniors by ensuring that their pensions are secure. on the GIS ineligibility. For many seniors across Canada, collecting CERB was a financial lifeline, but the system created by the current government has left them in a process mired with endless delays, confusion, and uncertainty. Seniors are now discovering that because they received emergency benefits from the CRA, they are not subject to the same rules as those who received CERB through the EI system. Despite meeting those requirements, seniors who collected emergency benefits through the CRA have been arbitrarily penalized based on the stream these funds came through. That is absolutely unacceptable. We have a plan to keep seniors in their own homes and to live with their kids if need be. We're going to amend the home accessibility tax credit by increasing the limit from $10,000 per dwelling to $10,000 per person, allowing seniors or their caregivers, including their children, to claim the medical expense tax credit for home care instead of only allowing them to claim attendant care if they live in a group home. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Climate change and the environment have become or have consistently ranked as a top issue for many Canadians in this election. Business, through resource extraction, manufacturing, production, and transportation, has an essential role to play in managing carbon emissions and their targets in Canada. How does your party plan to address climate change while maintaining a competitive business environment?
And we'll start with you, Allison.
Just getting to my page. Sorry, am I wrong? Sorry, one moment. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. I apologize. Well, we've already discussed some of this in terms of cleaner communities. The cost of commuting is high in pollution, and in Brantford alone, we have many Toronto transplants who have relocated here. It's wonderful to have them, of course, but longer drives mean higher gas costs and pollution. The Liberals, as I've already indicated, have already made zero-emission vehicles more affordable and accessible by offering up to $5,000 rebate to 500,000 Canadians already. The Liberals will continue to do so. I'm not going to repeat myself there. In terms of public transit, in terms of climate, Brantford City Transit is clearly vital to many people, expanding this service to cut down on emissions and allow for greener opportunities, working with rural Indigenous communities to create transit solutions that meet their needs, which we all know are substantial in our large riding. And the Liberals have already provided a permanent public transit fund of $3 billion per year. This is already in place to fund expanded services for more paths for bikes, scooters, wheelchairs, more walkways, the inclusivity of rural and Indigenous persons who have significant transportation issues, and exploring solutions with those communities and not just making decisions without them for large centres. The Liberals continue to wish to help make industries cleaner by including farming with respect to investing in clean technologies, and a Buy Clean strategy to support and prioritize the use of made in Canada clean products for infrastructure projects, both public and private. With respect to freshwater preservation, of course, we are right on the mighty Grand River that flows through our riding and connects us into the lake, connects all of our areas to each other and drains into Lake Erie. The Liberals, again, will continue to implement a stronger freshwater action plan, a historic investment of $1 billion over 10 years to continue to restore those lake systems, and continue to plan to build the net zero electricity grid by 2035 by driving down emissions from oil and gas, and developing additional investment tax credits for clean energy use.
Thank you. Mr. Brock.
We've already seen the devastating impact that climate change has had all over the world, and I really and sincerely worry about the future that my children and future grandchildren will inherit. I am pleased to advise that the Canada's Conservatives have a plan to address climate change head-on. Our plan includes a long list of ideas to reduce carbon use and meet our international commitments in the fight against human-caused climate change. We will use a carbon price to encourage Canadians to reduce their carbon use. We will create a carbon savings account where money is put into your pocket instead of the government's. When you fill up your gas tank, the money collected on the carbon price is credited to your account to spend on green products such as an efficient furnace, home insulation, or an electric vehicle. Our climate change plan also includes support for an increase in electric vehicles, retrofitting buildings to make them more efficient, reducing industrial emissions, innovative technologies such as carbon capture, incentives to protect and enhance natural infrastructure such as forests and wetlands, which help control or mitigate the impact of climate change. We also have a plan for resilient infrastructure. We have a problem here in Brantford. Flooding has been a problem for a number of years. It's a growing problem everywhere. We will implement a national action plan on floods, including establishing a residential high-risk flood insurance program. Municipalities need help to upgrade their storm sewer systems to handle bigger rainfalls. And municipalities and conservation authorities alike need help to maintain flood protection infrastructure like dikes and dams. We're going to build more infrastructure. We're going to deal with the natural infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure, and the transportation infrastructure. In close, we as Canada's Conservatives are committed to securing the future of my children and yours in building a cleaner, greener future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts.
Canada is the only G7 country whose emissions have gone up since the Paris Agreement, and we've never yet met a single emissions reduction goal. So we need to change that. We need to make sure that we are combating the climate crisis like we want to win. And we can do that through a just transition. So what is a just transition? A lot of people are asking. This starts by, instead of investing and putting billions of dollars into the fossil fuel industry, we're going to take that out. And we're going to reinvest instead that same money into low carbon initiatives. In addition, this is working with our municipal partners, our conservation authorities. I've recently had the pleasure of meeting the director of the Conservation Authority here locally. And we talked about actually how they are a leader in their emergency response system and using their knowledge and skills to connect with other conservation authorities throughout this country to model how to do emergency planning. But they too also still need help to respond to the disasters. I've already been evacuated once when we had the flood in 2017. We don't want to ever have anyone have to go through that again. So we need to ensure that a federal government is investing in the emergency funding when it comes to responding to the disasters that are happening in potentially in our community, as well as across the country. We need to create thousands of jobs, of good paying jobs as part of that just transition, investing in clean energy, energy efficient, affordable homes, electric transit, both inner city and intra-city, zero emissions vehicles, retrofitting buildings across the country. I spoke with Brantford Native Housing, as I said earlier. There are homes that right now that could be retrofitted and be part of a climate solution while also providing housing. We need to make the big polluters pay. We also want to work with our Indigenous peoples and ensure that we're setting up an Indigenous-led climate action strategy. And that means ensuring that we have Indigenous guardians who are responsible on their territory and working with them as a federal government to protect the land and the water.
Thank you. That's time. While our community is not a hub of natural resource extraction, residents and businesses here rely on Canada's natural resources every day, from paper to electronics to fossil fuels. What is your party's plan to continue to grow the natural resources sector of our economy in a responsible way? And we'll start with you, Mr. Brough.
I alluded to a little bit of that in the previous question. We want to invest in our natural infrastructure. Forests, wetlands, and other natural areas play an important role in controlling climate change and its impacts. We want to invest $3 billion by 2030 on managing forests, crop, and grazing lands, as well as the restoration of grasslands, wetlands, and forests. We want to provide incentives for farmers and landowners to protect and restore our natural infrastructure. We are committed to our farmers across this great land. And as far as our energy sector is concerned, we are concerned as Canadian Conservatives in terms of any sort of handicaps or any restrictions in terms of them providing the services and product to market. We need to address that. We need to address the pipeline issue, and unfortunately, with the current government, that has been handicapped. The energy sector is extremely important to this country as they move from a fossil delivery system to a more cleaner system. It is available to them, and we have to address that as a priority. Thank you.
Ms. Roberts.
As I alluded to earlier, one of our priorities is, first off, ensuring that big polluters pay their share. And that also means diverging the funds that we currently are putting in billions of dollars into our fossil fuel industry, instead moving that into low carbon initiatives. So by doing that, we are ensuring that we are not only supporting our natural resource workers into a just transition, but also making sure, because people want a job. People don't love oil and gas. What they love are good paying jobs. So we need to focus into new initiatives to ensure that we're moving away from the natural resource consumption of fossil fuels and instead into clean energy that will support workers and ensure that they can provide housing and food for their families. In addition, the natural resource. A new Democrat government is dedicating themselves to protecting 30% of water, land, and our oceans. We also know that there is a woodlot industry here locally in Brantford-Brant, and making sure that we're supporting with sustainable forestry practices, not just here locally, but across Canada. And we can't ignore our farmers in all of this. As someone who grew up rural, working in the fields as a kid, I know exactly how important the land is when it comes to our agricultural economy. Farmers know the value of soil, and a new Democrat government is invested in our agricultural economy. And that means ensuring that we're working to find innovative methods to protect the land while also taking carbon out of the air and through regenerative agriculture and other innovative methods. There are ways that we can work to ensure that we're protecting our environment and our natural resources while still ensuring that workers can feed their families. It can be done.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald, and you may have 1 additional minute to respond to the pipeline.
So the Liberals have put a price on pollution and carbon so we could put money back in the pockets of Canadians and provide financial support to industry in transitioning to a low carbon economy. At the end of July, our Liberal government announced $400 million in funding toward a $1.7 billion project to phase out coal-fired steelmaking at Dofasco and Hamilton. So this project will see the coal-fired blast furnaces replaced with a new technology that uses scrap metal, electricity, and natural gas to make steel. And this is just one example of how our government is helping to build a net zero economy through investments in world-leading technologies that make industry cleaner and reduce pollution. But building a green, low-carbon economy starts a lot closer to home. Actually, it starts with our own homes, and that's why we're helping more than 700,000 Canadians make their homes more energy efficient through the $5,000 Canada Greener Homes Grant. Since 2015, the Liberals have also banned single-use plastics to protect our oceans and waters, and they have worked to restore our Great Lakes, which provide 1 in 4 Canadians with clean drinking water, to name a few. By helping Canadians invest in energy-efficient retrofits to their homes and businesses, we can cut pollution, we can make life more affordable for families, and we can create good-paying jobs in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Paul. Incidents of racism and hate crimes have shocked many Canadians, and businesses are struggling to understand and address in-person and online behavior of some of our citizens, while also growing their business and providing jobs to Canadians. How can the federal government support the growing diversity of businesses while creating a more safe and inclusive society?
And we'll start with you, Ms. Roberts.
So first off, I want to say no one should ever feel like they don't belong here. And I personally moved and horrified by the events in June, did go attend the vigil in London for the family that out of racism was destroyed. I also attended the local vigil here at the mosque in solidarity to ensure that everyone knows that they should be able to walk anywhere they want, feeling safe and secure. Racialized communities have been hugely impacted by COVID-19, and we're often the last to get the vaccines. We know that racist hate crimes have tripled since the pandemic, and we've seen a 200% increase in active hate groups in the last 5 years in this country. A new Democrat government led by my leader Jagmeet Singh is committed to ensuring that we put out the fire of hate and racism. We can take action now with a national effort to tackle the rise in hate crimes. We're going to confront online hate and white supremacy. Let's call it out. We need to deal with it and no longer accepting it. We'll also put an end to the systemic racism that is in the RCMP. We're going to immediately ban carding by the RCMP. And we also need data. So we need to focus on gathering race-based data to track the problems, to know where the situations are arising. We want to work with our community groups because often people feel unsafe reporting the hate crimes that they experience and are more comfortable working with their community group and people they trust to report hate crimes. We need to address this. This is something that we can no longer ignore. We need to put out the fire of hate.
Thank you. Allison.
Well, it is completely and utterly unacceptable for anyone to have racially based motivations, outwardly or inwardly. It's un-Canadian. It's contrary to our human nature and fairness, as far as I'm concerned. And I was raised that we all should have basic human respect for each other, no matter the age, color, race, history, sexual preference, anything. In terms of balancing the realities, though, that we're dealing with in terms of hate and upset, I've seen many of my Liberal colleagues' signs defaced with completely aberrant symbols that are totally unacceptable. We're seeing hate clearly within Twitter remarks, particularly against female candidates, candidates of color, and this is unacceptable and has to end. But we need that from our leaders. We need our leaders to be advocating for that. And obviously the three of us are leaders and who would stand for that, absolutely. With respect to business, there are already initiatives in place, such as the Women Entrepreneurship Program, the Black Entrepreneurship Program. There is Indigenous business programming. And I'm clearly passionate about entrepreneurs and women in particular. We need more women to run small businesses. I believe I'm the only person up here who runs a small business, is a woman, and is Indigenous. And these programs exist, and more people need to take advantage of these in realizing their dreams. The Liberals have pledged $300 million to enhancing these initiatives to promote more diversity in entrepreneurs, because everyone who wants to start a business should be able to do so without barriers. The Liberals are there for people like me, for youth, for people of color, and welcome all persons to this platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry.
Hate, racism, any sort of racial slurs has absolutely no home here in Canada. And it's disheartening for me personally as a father of young children to see how easy it is for like-minded individuals standing behind a computer or a smartphone to be autonomous in their attacks against my own children, whether it's for whatever particular reason. The likes I've never seen growing up, and it's disturbing to say the least. It gives them a license that we have to stop as a federal government. Aaron O'Toole has made it abundantly clear that he will fight for the equal rights of all Canadians. And that is my mantra as well as a candidate for the Conservatives. I will fight hard for this entire riding, regardless of ethnicity, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. I will be a strong advocate for all because I believe diversity is our strength. And to take that to the next level and to incorporate that into the business world, I will fight hard to ban any sort of discriminatory practices that prevent our diverse workforce from entering and contributing in meaningful ways to our community. To Adrian's comment, I too was a participant at that mosque rally, and it moved me substantially, because what that family had to endure, what that culture had to endure, we need to stamp out in the most strongest of terms. And as a Crown prosecutor, I've always known that it has always been an aggravating factor when you commit a crime, if it is based on a race issue or a hate issue, that is a substantial aggravating factor. So I was pleased to learn that the prosecutors responsible for that prosecution are going to prosecute along those lines. We have to take a firm stand. There's no other alternative.
Thank you. Acquiring and retaining skilled talent was a challenge before leading into this pandemic. With skilled trade shortages across the country and multiple efforts locally to improve awareness and access to the advantages and opportunities of post-secondary education. How will your party support access to post-secondary education and skilled trades training? And we'll start with you, Ms. McDonald.
Well, I think part of that actually deals with returning to school. Having our teenagers returning to school, graduating high school, as well as our youth returning to in-person classes, that's first and foremost. And part of the platform in terms of the Liberals, and I believe that many of the schools have adopted already, would be the proof of vaccination to return to in-person schooling. In terms of returning and retaining skilled talent and the trade shortage and post-secondary education, I believe that the Liberals have did place student interest on hold during the pandemic, extended the Canada Student Grant Loan Program to be easier to pay, and I also understand that they are introducing a program to reduce the repayment of such once someone is first back into the workforce or entering the workforce. It's unfortunate that many of the trades were placed on hold, were not necessarily essential services. That's obviously being addressed, that's coming back. People returning to post-secondary, very important, and carrying forward obviously, we have to be back in school to be servicing our trades. So the stunted out of school e-learning and returning to in-person, to me, is the greatest asset for addressing that issue. And the procurement of the vaccines and allowing that in-person to take place is vital in terms of the Liberal platform.
Thank you. Mr. Brock.
A prosperous workforce is essential for any country to meet its obligations. And what I see is an opportunity for a paradigm shift. We have heard even pre-pandemic about the crisis in terms of a lack of skilled trades. The paradigm shift I'm referring to is to refocus our attention from higher learning, away from not necessarily you have to go to university, you have to get your bachelor's, you have to get your math degree, your science degree, but really removing the stigma of a trade, removing the stigma of going to a community college and learning a trade to contribute in a meaningful way to a particular profession or to a particular industry, is an opportunity for the federal government to work in conjunction with provincial governments across this country to ensure that there is adequate funding for advertising and strengthening our community college system to ensure that people making a decision out of secondary school aren't automatically defaulting, I have to go to university to get a BA and then end up without a job afterwards. So we need to have that paradigm shift to focus our priorities, and I think it's a glorious opportunity to do so. And the federal government, the Conservative government will look at that very, very importantly.
Thank you. Adrienne.
As an educator, no surprise, I am a full believer in education as being an investment. When you invest in education, you invest in people. One of the things that our party has in its platform is a focus on youth and ensuring affordability for school. So we have included a focus on reducing student loan debt. I myself still have a student loan. Many people I know in their 30s and 40s still have their student loan. Many youth are choosing not to go to post-secondary education because they are afraid of the debt load that occurs after. So an NDP government will look at a $20,000 decrease off your student loan within under certain conditions. So right off the bat, reducing student loan, because that payment is a barrier when you're trying to get started in your world as you're coming fresh out of school. As a teacher, I've also worked as the experiential learning teacher for my board, with a focus on skilled trades in particular. And a lot of the problem comes not through lack of interest, it comes through a lack of an ability to earn an apprenticeship. The hardest thing from transitioning from high school into skilled trades is finding an apprenticeship. So as someone who believes in education, and as someone who was the first in our family to go to university and comes from a long line of trade workers, electricians, miners, etc., I know the value of skilled trades in our society and the need for them. And that means working with our small businesses and companies to ensure that the apprenticeships are available, including apprenticeships for women who want to get into the trades, for members also who are newcomers to Canada, reducing the requirements and the red tape that comes from trying to access something that you did in the country in which you were born and that you have learned. You should be able to do it here. So we need to focus on all the new people who are coming in here with all these skills and utilizing it as part of our skilled trade plan. Education is vital, and I personally believe in a tuition-free education from K to post-secondary. I will always be someone who advocates and fights for education for all and a lifelong learning model. And that is something that I will advocate in my party and my government.
Thank you. Well, that wraps up the time we have for questions. So we'll move into closing statements, and we'll proceed in the reverse order of our opening statements, which means, Allison, we'll turn it over to you, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. When I look to our children, I see the best in all of us. I see the hope that we share. I feel the mutual goal we all have as Canadians, and that is to be free to choose our own paths within a democratic society. Now, more than ever, we must work together to keep our country strong. My goal is that every Canadian or sovereign person should have the chance to lead a life to the best of their ability. These are not small ambitions, but with hard work, we can create the future that we want for our families and reconcile our present with grace and goodwill. It is disheartening to me to witness the upset and anger that some of our citizens have demonstrated recently against our Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau. While I completely agree that people have a right to express themselves, I implore those watching to kindly ask yourself, if doing so, whether it be on Twitter or YouTube or within the confines of your own home, is this something you'd want Justin's children to see or your own children to see? I know how those angry people feel. I'm upset as well about this pandemic and what it has brought out in each of us, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the unjust. We've heard so much about essential services during the pandemic. To me, the most essential service every adult has on September 20th is to cast your vote. This isn't a time for hesitation or apathy. This is a time for serious people to address serious issues. And what I promise you is this: I will always look for a solution to anyone who asks to be heard. And remember, the MP for our riding will have to work just as hard for the people who do not vote for them as those who do. With your support, I would like to be that person. I am the candidate with the experience of balancing grit, grace, and determination. It's business as usual for me. I will be pleased to work with anyone who wants to help fight for our community, advocate for the little guy, and with your support, be the loud, outspoken, passionate, heart-on-my-sleeve Mohawk and the Liberal MP who Brantford-Brant deserves. Thank you very much to the Chamber of Commerce, again, for hosting today. Thank you to my fellow candidates for being formidable opponents. And thanks especially to the voters who are truly the ones with the power. Choose wisely, be well, and please vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure being here today to discuss our recovery plan for Canada. Again, I'd like to sincerely thank the Chamber, Rogers, and Brant.One for organizing and broadcasting this. I'd also like to thank my good friend Phil McColman for his service to Brantford-Brant. I wish him the best of luck in his well-deserved retirement. And finally, I'd like to thank the other candidates for putting their names forward. We've all learned that this is not an easy job, but it's vitally important, especially right now. We have been in the middle of this pandemic for more than 18 months. We must put Canada on a path to recovery. We must secure jobs by recovering the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic. We must secure mental health to help our fellow citizens and our communities. We must secure the country by taking steps to ensure that we are ready for the next pandemic and have the essential products we need and can make vaccines here in Canada. We must secure our economy by eliminating unnecessary spending and balancing the federal budget over the next 10 years and not leaving this tremendous burden to our children. We must secure accountability by enacting new anti-corruption laws to clean up the mess in Ottawa. When I talk to people, they tell me they are fed up with politicians who only look after their own interests. Unfortunately, the fact is we are in this unnecessary election in the middle of a pandemic. I can tell you, though, that as a lawyer and Crown attorney, I have lived my life by codes of conduct and ethics that emphasize honesty, integrity, and accountability. That's the kind of member of parliament that I want to be. It's the kind of government we need. It's the kind of government Conservatives will deliver. We need change in Ottawa so we can put today's darkness behind us and emerge into a brighter, more positive future. The Conservative Party has a plan for that, and I would be honored to be your voice as the next member of Parliament for this great riding of Brantford-Brant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Adrian.
Thank you all again for joining us here today, and I want to thank my fellow candidates for taking part in this debate. Canadian families are feeling more and more stressed as life becomes increasingly expensive. As an educator, I am confronted daily with the knowledge that a significant number of our youth feel hopeless about the future, unsure whether they will be able to afford post-secondary education, own a home, or even survive the climate crisis. Seniors speak of continued struggles and, for some, a life of poverty and isolation, while others, facing trauma and hopelessness, become faceless victims of the opioid crisis. We have failed too many in our community, which is why I want to be your MP, demanding that we change the tide of hopelessness to instead a grand river of hope that supports and nurtures all of us. I am ready to work hard for this community, to fight for a future with health care that puts you first, a future with good jobs, a future where the wealthiest pay their fair share, a future where we can confront the climate crisis and win, and a future where we can end long-standing inequalities. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have a record of fighting for you. Instead of protecting billion-dollar companies that profited from the pandemic, New Democrats have fought for you and your family, pushing the Liberal government on supports that helped regular Canadians and small businesses get through the pandemic. On September 20th, I hope that you will consider electing me as your MP so that I can fight for you every single day with radical empathy. That is my pledge to you. Thank you, merci, miigwech, nyawa.
Thank you. Thank you to the candidates for sharing your thoughts with us today and for your commitment to our community and our country. I'm confident that our discussion will greatly assist the residents of Brantford-Brant in making their very important decision on September 20th. Please continue watching after these closing remarks for statements from the Green Party of Canada, Carly Shortus, and other candidates that have submitted their statements. Thank you to Rogers TV and to Brant.One for partnering with the Chamber of Commerce of Brantford-Brant to provide this opportunity to the business community and our residents. This debate will be broadcast on Rogers TV and streamed online at Brant.One and through the Chamber and Rogers YouTube channels numerous times leading up to the September 20th election. Look to the Rogers TV, Brant.One, and Chamber social media channels for more details. Again, my name is Paul Basanti, First Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce, Brantford-Brant. Thank you very much for joining us. Please exercise your right to vote on September 20th.
Thank you to the Brantford-Brant Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. My name is Carly Shortus, and I'm the Green Party candidate for Brantford-Brant. I would like to respond to the 3 platform pillars released by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to support Ontario's business competitiveness as a key driver to our economic recovery. The green recovery is the strongest recovery. The investments that will yield the strongest results in restarting our economy are those in energy efficiency and renewable energy. Greens will launch a massive retrofit program in commercial, institutional, and residential buildings while employing millions of skilled tradespeople through local businesses. The Green Plan supports local businesses, increases business competitiveness, and achieves our climate goals and builds a more resilient, sustainable, and prosperous future. Canada's recovery will welcome a genuine nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people, including reconciliation of our history with First Nations. Canadians can expect the Greens to have meaningful consultation on development projects and equitable access to jobs, training, and good education. Economic and social recovery are intertwined. Greens are committed to implementing the full 94th calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Report. True reconciliation with First Nations in Canada is the pathway to prosperity for all nations in Canada. We know that science is not negotiable. Science tells us that we need to decarbonize our economy as much as possible and as soon as possible. We need to be net carbon neutral by 2050. The Green Party's plan establishes bold but achievable carbon reduction targets and includes creating a level playing field for Ontario businesses by implementing a carbon levy on imports from unregulated markets. The Green Party is ready, willing, and able to partner with industries to reduce carbon emissions, to be able to create space for new innovation in low carbon technologies and products, and build Canada's low carbon economy. I'm here to remind you that your vote matters. I'm Carly Shortus, the Green Party candidate for the Brantford-Brant, and I'm looking forward to working with the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses to build a flourishing, resilient, and sustainable future.
Good day, everyone. My name is Leslie Borey. I'm an independent candidate in the riding of Brantford-Brant in this federal election. If you'd like to see coverage of my campaign, tune into Brantford News on BitChute, Republican Labor Party on YouTube, or Brantford News on World Truth Videos. All right, everyone, I wish you all of the best in this election, and I hope you make an intelligent decision. Good day to all of you.
Hi, I'm John the Engineer Turmel, and 6 years ago I started smartestman.ca. Today I'm the only person saying medics and politicians were all duped by the most elementary trick in statistics, comparing apple to orange. Toronto Star, March 4th, 2020. The WHO said the latest virus mortality rate is 3.4%, well above the seasonal flu mortality rate of under 0.1%. They weren't comparing the same mortality rates. Comparing the COVID CFR apple to flu's 100-fold too small IFR orange made it look 100-fold too big. CDC said 50% of infections were from asymptomatics. Wuhan found 0 in 10 million tested. Like the flu, no sniffles, no spread. Masks, lockdowns were never necessary. My January statement of claim in federal court asking to declare COVID restrictions unconstitutional is in my book at Amazon. COVID mortality hyped 100-fold is the title. We made a big mistake, said Dr. Bridle in alarm. We didn't know the spike could travel, heart and brain to harm. When spike attaches in an artery, we find the flow impaired enough to have the blood clots start around to grow. Would you have taken clot shot if of danger you'd been told COVID mortality was overhyped 100-fold? Doctors warning about the spike protein are censored. I've had 5 videos taken down. See my KOTP page. All major parties will mandate you and your kids get your clots or suffer restrictions. Your only hope is for my long shot slate of no restriction candidates to go viral and get elected. Vote C19 team or suffer your clots. We were duped, but no more.